So, hello. Thank you very much first for this kind introduction. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to talk to so many people this morning. I'm really overwhelmed. So many students, so many colleagues just to hear my talk. No, not to hear my talk. You want to participate in the workshop. You want to get some idea of what we are doing here. I'm really welcome all of you. And I hope that this is a good next step to deepen our relationships between the HafenCity University, the USP, and everybody else who is, takes part in this project. Yes, the title of the workshop is Planning by Conflicts. And I think this is a very good title because it avoids a common mistake. Normally, you would expect something like planning and conflicts or the resolution of conflicts by planning. However, I think this is a very romantic view of planning to hope that it can resolve conflicts, or at least it could resolve all conflicts. I think it's much better to accept that planning will not be able to resolve all conflicts, but that you have to think about conflicts, which role play conflicts in planning procedures and planning processes, and to accept that even if your plan is a very good plan, in the end there will be still conflicts. So a very good, very well chosen subject. And I hope I can contribute something. Today I will talk mainly about three aspects of German planning law. So I will try to give you a little introduction into how German planning law deals with conflicts. But I guess it's not only about German planning law. I'm not an expert in so many other foreign planning law systems, but I'm pretty sure that I think the same problems exist in any planning system, and that planning law always has more or less the same approach to it. Not in the details, this might be different, but I think in general the approaches are similar. Perhaps sometimes different aspects are emphasized. As you will see, German planning law is very special in some parts, but as I said, I think that there are general ideas out there that are valid for all planning systems, other planning law systems out there. And I hope that we can have a little discussion about this, how you approach this in Brazilian planning law, other planning laws that you might know. Okay, today, as I said, I want to give you a little idea of how German planning law deals with conflicts. This is very abstract, so this is rather about the systematic of German planning law. I'm not going into too many details, but if you like to hear something about details, feel free to ask me, to contact me, to discuss this with me. So, yeah, this is the question: how does German planning law manage conflicts? Allow me two preliminary remarks. The first thing is, I think that planning law is all about conflicts. A colleague of mine wrote a major thesis 10 years ago, and the title of this thesis is Conflicts of Spatial Planning. And what he does there is he just lays out his theory of planning law. Practically every aspect is touched. I think that shows that perhaps planning law is all about conflicts. And if there were no conflicts, probably you wouldn't need planning law, but there are conflicts. The second thing I would like to mention is don't expect too much. As I said before, it would be a very romantic view of planning or planning law if you hope that planning law could resolve all problems. This is not true. Planning law may contribute in a way that perhaps you can manage conflicts, you can structure conflicts, you make them visible, and you find a way to deal with them. But I don't think that in the end all conflicts will be resolved. Perhaps you can mitigate conflicts, but they don't go away. Okay, there are three things I would like to draw your attention to today. The first thing I call the red line rules because, well, I don't have a better expression for it. Red line rules means is a regulation that is strictly binding. You will see what this means when I come to it. Then the second part is the principle of balancing. This is something very special, I guess. I don't know. You know European football you're interested in? This is the Champions League of planning law. I don't know what Champions League is in South America, but I think you got the idea. Only the very best scholars dare to write something about the principle of balancing. This is very, very complicated. Nevertheless, I will try to give you a little insight what this is about. And the third thing I would like to talk about is participation. Participation definitely is a way to address conflicts and to deal with them. And German planning law has to contribute something as well. Although, I have to say, this is a rather recent development in Germany that we think that you could do something about conflicts with participation. You will see what I mean by that later. Okay, let's start with the red line rules, as I called them. Examples for these red line rules you find, for example, in environmental law. So there's a rule out there in the German Water Act that says that you may not have a land use plan in a designated flood zone. The only exemption be if you make a land use plan for a harbor that might be flooded from time to time. Or other examples for those red line rules are in the so-called Land Use Utilization Ordinance. This is a very important ordinance in Germany. It's a federal ordinance applying to all municipalities. And this ordinance creates a system of area types. It contains a list of, I think it's 9 area types, starting with something like residential only, which is an area, obviously, where only residential uses are allowed, and similar things. And it goes down to industrial areas where you have the heavy industrial uses. Now, if you look at this ordinance, you will see that for each of those area types, the ordinance provides that some uses are allowed and others are excluded. So, for example, if you look at the residential only area, then as the name suggests, you have only 2 types of uses that are allowed there. Residential uses, which was the case for the last 50 years. And then a recent development, very recent development, you may have childcare facilities there. That's it. You may have some exemptions, so small things for religious infrastructure, for example, or social infrastructure, but only things that won't get in conflict with residential uses. On the other end of the spectrum, you have, as I said, the industrial areas, and not surprising, you will find that in industrial areas, you may have industrial plants, heavy industry, and residential uses are normally completely excluded. Why is that? Because obviously there would be a conflict between the industry and residential uses. Industry normally creates emissions that are not healthy for people living there. It's too loud, the air is not good enough. So you avoid a conflict by creating such an area type that allows only industrial uses, other commercial uses, but no residential uses in this area. And the other way around, with this residential only area, you have only residential uses there. Other uses that may interfere with the expectation that it's very quiet there, that you can lead your very quiet life there, are excluded. And believe me, this only other use that is allowed there, childcare facilities, was not put in there because people don't believe or don't think that there are conflicts between residents and little children, in particular if they come in masses. But, well, the German legislature is just very much in favor of little children at the moment, so that's the reason why they put it in. But normally, It's residential only because the legislator wants to avoid this conflict. And this is actually the way the whole ordinance works, that it creates areas and that you manage users by allowing them or excluding them. And this is a way to avoid conflicts. Or to come back to this Water Act example, that you may not have land use plans in flood zones. Well, it's obvious. If you see that this flood is coming down the river and you want to take pressure off the system, then you have to flood an area. So you have designated flood zones that are prepared to be flooded. Obviously, you would have a heavy conflict if somebody's living in this area, so you should try to avoid this. This is what I call red line rules. Perhaps it's obvious, but there are rules that are strictly binding, lines you may not overstep, red lines in this sense, and these rules are made not to be an obstacle in planning or a pain for planners or whatever, but to avoid conflicts. This is the idea of these kind of rules. Okay, this is the first category of rules, or the first way to approach conflicts in planning law. Now I come to the second one, which is the principle of balancing. And as I said, this is very complicated, but I hope to give you an insight. If you look at German planning law, and if you look at the details, then you will find that this principle of balancing has some sub-principles. And one of those sub-principles is a very promising one, because it's the principle of conflict resolution. And the courts ask for nothing less but that a plan must leave not any conflict unresolved. Well, promising, but what does that mean? I don't think that we can live up to this standard. This principle of balancing is, you will find it, for example, in the Federal Building Code in Germany. That is the statute that governs land use planning for the whole of Germany. And the legislator is very reluctant. If you look for this principle of balancing, you find it in the first section, subsection 7. I have to explain this Federal Building Code has about 250 sections. It's a rather long statute. And this principle of balancing, you will find only this one sentence. However, this is the central legal principle of planning in Germany, although the legislator is very reluctant. Why is that? You will even find older statutes where the principle of balancing is not even mentioned. But this doesn't matter. Here now come the lawyers in play, because the Federal Court of Administrative Matters in Germany said that the principle of balancing is a principle that applies no matter what the legislator says about it, because this principle is derived from the Federal Constitution. The Federal Constitution knows the principle. You see, it's very principled, so many principles here. The Federal Constitution knows a principle of proportionality, and yes, the courts say that this principle of balancing is the embodiment of the principle of proportionality in planning. What does it mean? Mainly that if you make a plan, you have to balance all the different interests. So, for example, if you build a street, you might have, obviously, traffic interests that you want to serve. This is normally the priority. There might be economic interests behind the street as well, or social interests, if you want to have a connection within a city, not connected areas, whatever. These might be pros to build the street. On the other hand, you have things, cons, that might count against the street. For example, if you want to build a street, normally you need land for it. Perhaps you have to expropriate it. So there are private interests against the street. Or you have environmental interest against the street. So the idea of balancing here is that you have to find a balance between all the involved interests. Well, now, I mentioned 5 interests. However, the game is normally much more complicated. If you look at the Federal Building Code again, you will find a list of interests. The legislator says this is a good idea to think about. You see, these are 13 headings. There are some obvious things for a land use planning code like living and working conditions, housing. Then you see number 7 is environmental interest. I have to mention these are only headings. It becomes way more detailed at this point. There are environmental interests, number 7, economic interests, number 8. The list gets longer every year, or not every year, but from time to time. Latest edition from last year, very recent development in Germany, are the needs of refugees, because they need to live somewhere and you have to plan this. This list shows that it's very complex. And one thing of this list, as I said, it's way more detailed than I can show here, on the one hand. The other thing is it's not even exhaustive. So it doesn't mean that you may not look at other interests. This is not true. You have to look at all interests that are affected by the plan. This is just the list the legislator came up with, telling you, well, this is what we thought of. If you have something else you may think of, please do this. So you see, it's very complicated, because with each plan you make, you have to balance all those interests. To give you a number, for a normal land use plan in Hamburg, the town where my university is situated, the planning authority will send a letter to more than 70 other authorities to ask for their opinion to the plan. 70 authorities. We are not talking about public participation. This is just other authorities who might have interest in this plan. So you see how many interests might be involved. Okay, how does this work? How can this principle of balancing work out that you can manage all those interests in the plan? The courts and legal science have developed a 4-step test a planning authority has to undergo. That means all municipalities who do land use plans, all of planning authorities who do infrastructure plans have to go through this process of balancing. And this 4-step test goes like that. The first step is that the planning authority must balance. So they need to recognize that they are obliged to balance, and they must do this. Now you think this is trivial, but sometimes actually authorities don't do this. They don't balance because perhaps, very common situation, a municipality has a contract with a developer for, say, a new shopping mall. And now they have to make the plan for the shopping mall. And it might happen that they just, well, perhaps they think they are bound by the contract. Perhaps they are afraid of the developer if they don't come up with this plan for the new shopping mall. But it might happen that they are not prepared anymore to balance the interests involved, but they just look at, well, we need a new plan for the shopping mall no matter what, so perhaps we don't balance at all. This is a situation that might occur from time to time. Very special, very radical cases, but they happen. But this is not the difficult step. The next step is more important, and this is perhaps the most dangerous part of this test as well. All interests that are affected by the plan must be accounted for in the planning process. So the planning authority must identify all interests that are somehow affected by the plan. This is really a challenge. Well, obviously they have some help. For example, the whole procedure, participation, serves the purpose to give the municipalities, the planning authorities, notice of interests that are affected by the plan. But still they have obligations to do their own research. And this is, as I said, a big challenge, and it will take some time for a municipality or other planning authorities to find all the aspects that are touched by the plan. And it's a very dangerous part of the planning process because this is a part that will be scrutinized very thoroughly by courts. Because this is very easy to see for a court whether the municipality found all aspects of the plan. Somebody might show up and say, we were not involved, our interests are not in this balancing, and well, this is something that is controlled very closely by the courts. Then, after the planning authority has identified all the interests that are involved, they have to adjust the proper weight to those interests. Now it becomes difficult because this means that, yes, the authority can decide what is most important for us. This is a field where the authorities have a rather big discretion. They have identified interests like, for example, economic interests, environmental interests, and now they have to decide what is most important for us in this situation. And it's not that they can only find one solution here, but there's normally a whole range of different solutions. Municipalities are actually free. For example, if you have a vacant area, you can say, I want to develop it as a residential area because we need housing. Or I want to develop it as a commercial area because we need place for new business. And both might be true, and it's in the discretion of the municipality to make their own decision what is most important for them in this decision, in this plan. And this goes then to the fourth step, which is perhaps even the same step. Some scholars actually say that it's not a four-step test, but only a three-step test. You must bring all those interests involved in a proportional balance. That means you have to weigh in a fair way. Again, municipalities, other planning authorities have a discretion here. It's not that there's only one right solution. Normally, you have a whole range of solutions you can find. If you build a street, we may say it's a very broad street, it's a narrow street, or no street at all. Possible solutions in the same planning process, depending on what kind of weight you adjust to which interest. So, as I tell to my students, although this looks a bit like lawyers are torturing planners, after all, planning is the area in the administration, at least in Germany, where you have the biggest discretion to do things you find important. I think there's no other area in German administration where you have more political discretion as planning. Okay, what is this good for? To undergo this really tedious task of going through this balancing process. Obviously, you will find that in the end, you have looked at all interests, and perhaps you are able to mitigate some of the conflicts, but probably the conflicts are not resolved. I think the main feature here is that all the conflicts are visible now. After going through this very complicated balancing process, every interest should be laid open, and all conflicts are now visible. So this principle of conflict resolution doesn't mean that you will resolve all conflicts. It means mainly that you have to say there is a conflict and we need to do something about it. We have to decide about this conflict. There might be still a conflict, but we cannot just ignore it. The planning authority must decide about the conflict, and because everything is visible, the cards are open, this is open for court review as well. So there's a second check on your plan, which is the court review. Although courts are very reluctant in Germany with plans because they say it's not our decision whether this is a good plan or not a good plan. The only thing we will control is whether there's an interest that was treated in a way that is completely out of proportion to its objective weight. Only if this happens, if somebody's treated in a really bad way, then a court will step in and invalidate the plan. But normally, courts are very reluctant. Okay. I think this was very complicated. Now I make it even a bit more complicated. German planning law. One remark about German planning law. Normally we distinguish two categories of law. This is very legal now. Somebody promised that this is not a legal talk, but sorry for that. I'm a lawyer. What did you expect? We distinguish two categories of law. One is what we call materielles Recht, substantive law, and the other thing is formelles Recht, which is procedural law. Substantive law, examples for that are, for example, this red line rules I mentioned, or the principle of balancing. And substantive law has, or is characterized, that is, it relates to the content of the plan. So you look at the content of the plan, the outcome. You look at the plan, what is the content? Procedural law looks at the planning procedure. How did this plan evolve in a formal procedure or in an informal procedure that was going on before the planning decision was made? Now you need to know, or you may know one, or tell you anyway. There's one thing about German planning law you need to know. We are not very fond of procedural law. German planning law or German administrative law normally looks at substantive law. There's a not so nice general rule that says it doesn't matter how many mistakes you made throughout the procedure. If the decision in the end, if the content of the plan is okay, then a court normally cannot invalidate the plan. One example, I don't know whether you heard about the famous not existing airport in Berlin. We are building an airport, or at least we try. And this airport is famous for many things, and among lawyers, it's famous for its planning procedure and the planning permission. Yes, and there was something that happened. This was a major planning procedure. And the rule is that when you plan at an airport in Germany, you have to put the draft of the plan on display at one stage. This serves the participation of the citizens. So people can look at the plan and then they can issue their commentaries on the plan. And with this airport, 130,000 commentaries were issued by the general public. So private citizens issuing commands on the plan, airport, 130,000. How is this managed? Normally, the municipalities that are affected by the plan put this plan on display. Now, they had a problem in Berlin. When they were planning the airport, they were thinking about, if you plan an airport, you think about the routes the airplanes take to get into this airport. And they had an idea how this would work. However, after the airport is planned, finally, the routes were adjusted in a new way, and it turns out that now the airplanes are supposed to fly in a different way into the airport, which affects new municipalities nobody has thought about earlier. So there are a whole lot of people affected by the airport because it makes noise that were never asked for their opinion. The plan was never put on display in their municipalities. Now those people sued. They came up to the Federal Administrative Court, and what did the court say? Well, yes, this was a mistake, should not have happened, but, well, there were so many municipalities where this thing was on display. We don't think that you could have contributed a new aspect. Well, there are many people who are affected and you were not heard, so you're far, but we don't think that you could utter any new aspects. Everything is decided about, so doesn't matter. Planning permission is fine. We don't think there would be any other results if you did participate. Well, this might be a good decision from the planner's point of view because this planning permission is not invalidated. However, what does this do with the people who are now affected by an airport and they never had the chance to issue any commands on this plan? So think about it. This is the general approach of German planning law and German administrative law to those matters. Procedural law doesn't play such a big role. However, there's a change, at the moment. And this change has a name. It's another big project you might have heard of, perhaps not. It's very famous in Germany. Everybody knows what it is. It's Stuttgart 21. Stuttgart, you may know, is a town in the southwest of Germany, very famous for some of the companies who are situated there, like Daimler-Benz or Porsche or Bosch. It's a very wealthy area, so you might think that people have nothing else to do than to demonstrate. What they are demonstrating against a station, a major project, a railway station, a project. It's not only the station, it's obviously some railway lines as well, high-speed, state-of-the-art railway lines. The project is worth about 5 and 6 billion euros, last estimates. So there was a planning procedure, and this was running the normal way. I think 11,000 people participated. There was a planning permission issued. This planning permission went to court, was upheld by all courts. Everything was fine. And then something happened. The German railway company started to build this station. And suddenly there were protests against it. And not only protests by some crazy left-wing activists, but normal people who probably have never demonstrated against anything were standing at the fence of this construction site protesting against this station. And it went so heavy, well, there was an election then, there was a landslide victory of the Green Party in Germany. For the first time, they were able to get a Green prime minister into government in a German state, in a state actually that was governed for more than 50 years by the conservative Christian Democrats. Really something very new. And those demonstrations were going on, and it was really close to collapsing, this project. Even the highest judge in Germany, the president of the Federal Constitutional Court, made himself heard in a way that he said, this cannot be. It cannot be that we have a planning permission, there's a developer who has a right to build, and then the whole project collapses because people are standing there and demonstrate. But this just happened. Well, the story had a good end, at least for the project. They held a referendum, and surprise, surprise, people upheld the planning permission. So the majority of the people living in the state were in favor of the station. Okay, perhaps not the majority of people who are directly affected, but again, this is a democratic thing to do, and now I think it's rather quiet there. But this made German politicians think about procedures, because somehow they understood suddenly that there might be a point in having a very good procedure that makes people understand what is going on there, and make them understand perhaps why their own interests must step back and other interests here, the traffic interests obviously, must prevail. Now they have an approach to planning procedures that they try to create acceptance, something rather new. And if you look at German planning law, well, it's now changing a bit. Now they try to emphasize participation in the procedure, in particular participation at a very early stage in the process when not all the decisions are already made. So far, normally, there was a draft plan on display. People could issue their opinion about this, but this was already the finished plan. And authorities are very reluctant to make amendments to finished plans. Now the idea is that people should participate in a very early stage where not all the decisions are made, but when the project is still open and you have various alternatives that you can pursue. And if you want to have a look at it, there's one statute in Germany, I was talking about it yesterday already in Sao Carlos, that is the perfect embodiment of this new thought. It's the it's about high voltage, the building of high voltage lines in Germany. And if you look at this statute, you will see that they have a 5-level planning process starting on a very abstract level, going down to the detailed project, the concrete project in the end, and you have participation everywhere, even on a level when you think about how should the grid in Germany be structured in 10 years. There will be public participation, and the single citizen is asked what to do about this. Perhaps this is already a bit too much, but it shows that there is perhaps a new understanding of the importance of participation in German planning procedure. Well, what does it mean? I think participation alone will not resolve conflicts too. But what it may help to do is actually to increase transparency and acceptance with respect to the plan. And perhaps this is able to mitigate some of the conflicts. There are some examples out there that show that this could be a good approach. Well, this was a little insight about 3 aspects of German planning law. I think even if you don't know anything about German planning law, you might have recognized one or the other feature from your own system. And, well, I'm very happy to accept questions or to discuss whatever's planned now. Thank you very much for your attention. Any questions? Or okay.
Obrigado, professor Martin Wickel. Acho que foi bastante esclarecedor e bastante produtivo para nós conhecermos esse modo de planejamento, que, no fundo, temos aqui vários alunos que estão envolvidos, né, no poder público, que trabalham com isso, de estudantes de graduação e de pós-graduação. Eu convidei para ser debatedor desse tema o professor Irineu Bagnariolli, professor da Faculdade de Direito, bacharel em Ciências Sociais, que participou dos governos democráticos em 89 e, portanto, tem longa experiência e assistiu a esse processo participativo ser implantado nas gestões petistas, né? Então, esperamos um bom debate.
Bom dia a todos. Bom dia, professor. Bem, eu vou apenas tentar fazer... Eu gostei muito da palestra e, com certeza, nós estamos vivenciando um processo parecido em outra escala, né? Também há alguns anos, a questão da participação e das tentativas de desenvolver aspectos formais e institucionais das regras de planejamento tem sido uma tônica nos governos democráticos brasileiros. Nesse sentido, eu gostaria que, se o senhor pudesse estabelecer uma relação entre um problema que se afigura também no Brasil e que, me parece, também foi um problema que se afigurou na Alemanha. Nós vemos que um processo de planejamento, de fato, como o senhor explanou, ele abrange aspectos formais e aspectos estruturais, né? Aspectos processualísticos. Então, nesse sentido, nós temos enfrentado conflitos sobre inovações urbanísticas. Um exemplo que talvez todos conheçam, falando de um problema bem presente, é o que ocorre em São Paulo hoje, por exemplo, que ocorreu com as vias seletivas para transporte coletivo e que hoje ocorre com as vias para bicicletas, que promove, junto à própria população, opiniões muito diferentes, opiniões muito contraditórias. O que eu pergunto ao senhor Em que sentido é que, como o senhor se referiu no começo, acaba, mesmo com um processo participativo que não seja deliberativo, a decisão acaba sempre sendo tomada com uma certa discricionariedade pela autoridade competente. Ou seja, quando o conflito se apresenta, quando o conflito se mostra transparente, evidentemente, acaba se colocando que quem decide qual parte do conflito será beneficiada e qual será prejudicada é a autoridade coatora, digamos assim, a autoridade que estabelece, que toma as decisões. E, de fato, me parece que na Alemanha, como em outros países desenvolvidos, mas em especial na Alemanha, o direito acaba também jogando um papel muito importante nessa questão, porque as cortes, os fóruns, os tribunais acabam participando de uma forma ou de outra, contestando ou ratificando esta tomada de decisão. Porém, como o senhor mesmo afirmou, é exclusivamente sobre o aspecto formal. Digamos assim que o tribunal acaba não entrando no mérito da questão. Ele apenas verifica se formalmente todos os passos do plano foram cumpridos. Se a lei do equilíbrio foi estabelecida, ele diz, bom, então está ok, não há nada que nós possamos fazer para impedir, mesmo que isso signifique um amplo prejuízo para setores amplos da população. Como o senhor estabeleceria esse comentário a respeito desse problema que nós também enfrentamos aqui? Pois também no Brasil, apesar de algumas inovações serem amplamente benéficas para setores da população, outros setores acabam sendo prejudicados. E aí quem decide acaba sendo efetivamente a autoridade, mesmo com o processo participativo.
Thank you for this question, because this is really my favorite subject, yes. Many people in Germany today doubt the authorities, whether they are really well suited to make those kind of planning decisions, or they feel that the authorities are too much detached from what's going on. In this discussion, actually, I become very supportive for authorities. I really developed kind of deep trust in that they know what they do. Well, one technical thing. The decision is made by planning authorities. As said, the planning authorities have a wide discretion to pursue their own lines of development. So in a traffic context, for example, Hamburg is now discussing how to develop its traffic system, whether they want to build a streetcar or they want to build a new subway line to promote bicycles, or to promote traffic with cars, or to close the city for cars. All these things are possible. And it's the responsibility of the authorities to find a, say, sensitive way to deal with the matter. And even though I don't like this decision very often, because I would have gone for more bicycles, perhaps, and less cars, well, I accept this because I trust into the expertise of the authorities. Courts will step in a moment when you say there will be harm done to the population. This is something probably where you have a line that you may not overstep. So if you find that some interests are really treated in a disproportional way, very badly, are left out of consideration, are not pursued at all, then perhaps court might step in and say, well, this does not work that way. There's an interest, and it's treated so badly, even from an objective point of view, this does not work anymore. This might be a case where the discretion of the authorities is limited, but it's rather the experience of many people who try to sue against plans that where they are disappointed because the courts say, well, you may not like the decision. We may not like the decision as well, but it's still a sensible decision, something you can do if you look at the interests and if you balance them. Perhaps we would have come to another outcome, but it's still okay. So there is court review. So in very radical and very dangerous case, perhaps courts may step in, but it's true, courts are very reluctant. We rely on the authorities. There's one instrument at the moment in Germany that is sort of a corrective, which is ballots. This is something completely different. It's not really participation. I distinguish normally participation in a planning process, participation when the citizens, the public, participate in a planning procedure. That serves the purpose that the authority then knows about the interests, about the opinion of the public, but they don't have to follow it. They are not bound by it. They have the information they need to decide, but it's not necessarily that they have to do what the public wants. And this is, I think, the normal way in a planning procedure. However, there's one instrument that is very popular in Germany today, in particular in Hamburg, which is ballots. You may bring up a question as a private citizen and in a way that it can be voted on it. So many planning issues in Germany or in Hamburg today are decided by the voters, or at least there are procedures that lead to this decision. So, for example, there was a I don't know, you know what IKEA is? This Swedish furniture company, I don't know whether you have it here, that developed a market in Hamburg a couple of years ago, right in the middle of the city, which is a new concept for them. Normally they're at the outskirts of the city. And this was highly controversial because everybody was shouting, this is gentrification. And, well, this is very abstract. Okay, and then there were, well, the district made the decision that they want to have this IKEA, and then there were two initiatives to try to bring this on the ballot. There was one initiative pro-IKEA, and the other initiative against IKEA. And finally, the population voted on this, and there was a huge majority to vote in favor of IKEA. But you see other examples, urban projects that are subject to such ballots today that are cancelled then. And I come to the point to say, well, this is an instrument, a corrective. If the authorities, well, people participate, utter their opinion, the authority decides in another way, in another direction, but if they overstep a limit, like the public cannot bear this, then the public has this instrument, the referendum, to decide about the project, and this might be a corrective, but you're right, authorities have a very central role in this. And well, in Germany, we tend to believe that authorities work for the common good. The authorities, in principle, are the bearers of the common good, the representatives of the common good. So, well, this is what we basically believe in. But I have to say it's my personal experience too. Sometimes I'm not happy, but normally I think that they have very good reasons to do what they do. Other people might have other experience or other opinions about this, but they have the chance to say this later. Okay.
Apenas mais uma questão que eu gostaria que o senhor comentasse, por gentileza, professor. Nesse sentido, exatamente o que o senhor está colocando, foi justamente um grande pensador alemão, um dos maiores, né, da sua geração, que foi o Habermas, como nós comentávamos, que estabeleceu um novo patamar para a democracia quando criou o conceito de democracia deliberativa ou dialógica, que significa, essencialmente, você ouvir as pessoas antes de tomar as decisões e que a opinião das pessoas tenham, essencialmente, poder deliberativo e não apenas consultivo. Ou seja, as autoridades, este poder da autoridade, e aqui nós também desconfiamos demais do Estado, sempre, né? Este poder da autoridade, eles teria que se subordinar, digamos, à vontade coletiva, e não às vontades individuais ou vontades partidárias ou vontades ideológicas. Como o senhor vê o avanço da capacidade da população de decidir de verdade e não apenas de participar ou de opinar, protestar, sem que isto também impeça que o conhecimento técnico seja colocado a serviço dessa própria população, porque a ausência de conhecimento técnico muitas vezes pode vir a promover decisões que no futuro serão prejudiciais, como nas questões ambientais, por exemplo, né? Então, como o senhor vê essa questão, por gentileza?
Complicated. This is really a dilemma, yes. One thing I have to stress, I'm really in favor of procedural procedures and participation, and I'm really very opposed to this approach of German administrative law. I demonstrated to you that they rely heavily on the content of the decision and do not look at the procedure. I have to mention that perhaps administrative law in Germany is now under heavy pressure because this is very much a German tradition, a tradition of legal thinking in Germany. However, this is confronted today with another legal system that is very important for us in Germany, which is the European legal system. And the European legal system is very much influenced by the common law system of England. And this is a system that pays much more attention to procedures. Well, this is not detailed, but there the idea is roughly, if you have a good procedure, then this procedure will come to a good outcome. It doesn't matter so much. The materials, the substantive rules are not so important. You decide case by case in a procedure, and the procedure will guarantee that it is a good decision. So they trust in procedures. Germany trusts more in fixed rules. But this is a conflict that we have now. The German system is under pressure because the European law requires us to adjust. And there are, for example, in infrastructure planning and planning, there are now procedural rules that must be followed just because they are there. So in some areas today, you may bring a case to court just saying, well, there was a procedural rule and it was violated, and I want to this decision to be to invalidate it because the procedural rule was violated, and that this may happen in very, not in many cases, but there are special cases based on European law where you have this in Germany today as well. So now to Habermas. Yes.
Okay.
I don't have a good answer to that. Yes. It's kind of, well, it's exactly the balance you have to find between, on the one hand, the technical knowledge that, in particular, authorities represent in some cases, and the will of the public. And I derive at the moment, my sentiment is very much impressed by, well, until a couple of years I would have said, let the people decide. But I'm very much impressed by a couple of cases in Hamburg where I found authorities were pursuing really sensible projects, really good projects. And then there were very small minorities who were able to bring their interests on the ballot. They reached a vote on the project because they had very special interests, like, I'm the neighbor of this project, I don't like the project, so I let the whole district, 400,000 people, vote on it. Most people do not even know what they vote on. They have no opinion whatsoever. They just, most people don't vote anyway, so not in these questions. But this is was a major threat to projects I really liked. I found them very good, very sensible, but they were put off because there was the threat of a referendum, or there was a referendum, where I felt that people should not have voted because nobody really understood what it was about. So I was a bit suspicious about this public will and how it evolves. And if you look, for example, at this instrument of referendum, there's research out there showing that they always work in, say, a certain direction, because, for example, you need some money to put your question on the ballot. So it requires technical knowledge to organize such a ballot, or in Germany, for example, you have to collect thousands of signatures before you can put something on the ballot. And you have to organize this. Probably you need money. There are companies out there doing this for you. And, well, I'm a bit afraid of, say, very specialized interests who are able to get their interests through in this way. And, well, there are examples out there where I thought the technical solution is very, very good, and the public will was against it. Why? Ever, don't know exactly. But, well, this is what I feel at the moment, and it goes in waves, back and forth, back and forth. It has something to do with what I see on an everyday basis. On the other hand, I see that we now have the experience that sometimes such vote on a question helps very much to actually, to solve the problem, the conflict. Like this IKEA example that I mentioned. This was highly controversial and a big discussion in Hamburg. But suddenly 77% of the people voted in favor of it. And I think more than 50% of the voters who were eligible actually participated, which is quite something. And you may like it or not, but at least the thing was resolved. There was a very substantive discussion on a very high level in the public, and the public decided. And this other thing in Stuttgart I mentioned, you had the impression that the public will was strictly opposed to this project. But it turns out that if you ask the people statewide, at least they were in favor of this project. You could explain it to them. So sometimes this is really helpful, and you are able to bring in line this public will and the technical knowledge of the authorities. But honestly, I'm not able to decide what I would favor more at the moment, because, yes, my impression sometimes is that the so-called public will lacks sometimes the technical knowledge to make sensible decisions. But as I said, I'm very confident about the authorities in Germany, so that they are bound in a democratic way, so where they are, they can be, well, after all, they are bound to the government, by the government, and the government is subject to elections, and so I think they adhere to what the people want to do, and so what the public will is. So I'm confident that there's a sort of a balance here that works. So yes and no, I don't know. It's a complex question.
Bom, eu vou, como nós temos algumas mesas a seguir, eu gostaria muito de agradecer em nome do curso de Direito à professora Ana Paula, que gentilmente nos convidou através do Centro de Direitos Humanos e ao curso de Direito, a Paula, coordenadora, para participar desse evento. É com muito prazer que estou aqui. Gostaria de dizer a vocês da extrema importância da palestra do professor, porque nosso direito tem uma grande influência do direito germânico. O direito brasileiro sofre uma enorme influência do direito germânico, inclusive, hoje ainda se discute civil law e common law como formas mais estratégicas de conduzir o direito. Então, a sua experiência, professor, é muito importante para nos ajudar a compreender a própria essência, que eu acho que o que ocorre na Alemanha também tem uma grande repercussão aqui no Brasil. Então, gostaria de agradecer, parabenizá-lo pela palestra e agradecer a todos. Bom dia, muito obrigado.